I'm joined now by Sweta Chakraborty. She's the U.S. president of We Don't Have Time, a social media network focused on fighting climate change. So, Sweta, first I want to get your reaction to COP26 so far and what world leaders have pledged or said at this point. India, Brazil, for example.
So we just heard from India today that they will be reaching net zero emissions as a country by 2070. This is a decade later than China and Russia and Saudi Arabia. And while it is still within mid-century, and that's kind of the vague language that's being used to ensure that all the major emitting countries of carbon are still pledging to get to net zero before the end of this century, of course, but by somewhere around mid-century, 2070 is far too far out. There is such an urgency to make sure that the US and other major polluters halve pollution by 2030. That's within a decade, so that countries can get to net neutral by 2050 so that we can stay below that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by the end of the century. So to hear from India, a 2070 deadline for reaching net neutral is actually much farther out than we would have liked to have heard. And no countries are experiencing this more poignantly than the vulnerable island nations. The very sovereignties are at risk for these countries that are low-lying as compared to sea level and are going to be experiencing the worst impacts of climate change if the major polluters around the world don't act more urgently. So there's been a real cry from these island nations like Barbados and Maldives and others to really have climate leaders make tough decisions now that might be painful and costly, but ultimately protect global sovereignty of independent nations.
We saw U.S. President Joe Biden apologize for the United States leaving the Paris Accord under his predecessor. Should other leaders, other countries be concerned about U.S. climate commitments given congressional deadlock on climate as we speak the political climate in Washington?
So this is a really crucial week for the passage of the Build Back Better Act that is fundamentally Joe Biden's platform on climate and investment in climate resiliency and infrastructure and the ushering in of clean energy jobs that ultimately will save Americans $500 annually on their energy bills. So this isn't really anything that is going to be negative, and it needs to be shared in that light so that we can get American support and the representatives and decision makers that vote on their behalf to pass this $555 billion agenda on climate investment through this week. This is huge for the United States. It's the largest investment in climate that's ever happened in this country, and it's happening simultaneous to Joe Biden leading climate negotiations at COP26. They're happening at the same time, and if it passes in the US this week, which is what the hope is, now there is some real foundation for President Biden to stand on going forward and carrying the torch to say, look at what America can do at home. This is what countries can do and look forward to, and ultimately it's a better, brighter, and more equitable future for everyone.
All right, Sweta Chakraborty, we appreciate your time. We'll continue to get your thoughts as the week progresses. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.